This is CSIS Online.
Great, thank you. Thanks to everyone for tuning in to CSIS's event today on quantum computing. We started working on quantum, looking at quantum as an event of interest in Washington a little while ago, because what appeared is that the rate at which we're approaching quantum computing is faster than I think a lot of us might have originally thought. So it may not be here now, it might be here now, but it's very close. And so part of what we're thinking about as you think about really the next iteration of computing, huge changes in computing capability, but also huge demands for workforce and the creation of new opportunities that will take some time to work out. Here to discuss it, we have a great panel. I'm not going to introduce them. I'm going to introduce the moderator, Naomi Nix, who is a Bloomberg reporter that covers social media companies and technology. She has a long experience in reporting. That always sounds like it makes you old, but I don't mean it that way. Going back to the Chicago Tribune, her work has appeared everywhere. With that, Naomi, I'm going to turn it over to you, and we will watch the panel with interest. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim, for that contribution. I was unoffended by that. I'm really excited today to have this conversation and sort of examine this question: how do you build a diverse quantum workforce? And I think it's a particularly timely conversation. The pandemic, I think, has revealed to anyone how deeply unequal our country is. And at the same time, also kind of revealed how critical technology is to the way we work and live. And I think those are important themes to keep in mind as we kind of examine this question about how industries are going to use quantum to solve problems beyond the limits that classical computers can. And to talk about, just how do we reach a diverse student population as we build a workforce that has these quantum computing skills. And that's why I'm really excited that we actually have some students in our audience today. And later on, we're going to get a chance to hear some of their questions and the things that have come to mind to them on this topic. I think just to start things off, I'll just let each panelist introduce themselves to talk a little bit about who they are, what they did, and just a little bit about how they got started in this field. And so let's start with Tara. Could you begin with a little introduction?
Hi, I just want to make sure everybody can hear me. Okay, perfect. Anyway, before I introduce myself, I'd like to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to participate on this panel. I mean, for two things that I think are very, very important nationally, quantum information science, as well as diversity and equity in our workforce. Just to give you a little background about myself, I was originally born and raised in Montreal, Quebec, which is the French part of Canada. And I came to the United States to pursue my doctoral degree. And I worked at the University of Colorado on laser systems to learn how to try to be able to use light as a way to control quantum properties in materials. I then moved to the Los Alamos National Labs in a joint position with the National Institute of Standards and Technology, where I worked on comparing atomic clocks as a way to test the fundamental tenets of physics. And eventually I stayed on at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. I work there in the time and frequency division as a physicist. And what I do is I help to support people who work on and develop optical atomic clocks as a means to try to extract precision timing signals, which we can use, for tests of fundamental science, for precision timing, for GPS, and also for synchronization of big networks such as communications. Ultimately, one thing I'd like to kind of get across to students is that I am not, trained specifically as a quantum scientist, but I'm part of the quantum workforce in that I support the quantum industry by providing optical infrastructure, right, to support the actual technology. And I think that that's something important to note, is that the workforce isn't this kind of narrow spectrum of quantum scientists. There are so many different ways that people can contribute to quantum technologies, as engineers, as computer scientists, as people who develop algorithms, and as people who eventually will help to develop products and in markets. So I'm so excited to be here with all of you, and I'm happy to share my ideas and my background on how we can improve diversity in the workforce and what skills would be needed, to be able to have people actively contribute.
Thank you. Saida, why don't you give us a little information about yourself?
Good afternoon, Naomi, Tara, Talita, and hi to everyone that is joining us. It's really a great pleasure to be here with all of you today. I was born and raised in Puerto Rico. I work now at IBM. I'm technical assistant to our senior vice president and director of IBM research. And I'm also a technical leader for theory and applications at IBM Quantum. But my career, as that of many in the field, and Tara alluded to this, did not start in quantum computing. My background is in condensed matter physics theory. My journey here was one with many turns. After doing years of research, I decided to take a hiatus to learn a new set of professional skills, gain different experience, and worked at the US Department of State in science policy. Later on, I moved to advising and helping run programs to advance research and development of strategic technologies for the Department of Defense and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. And it's in the latter, more specifically IARPA, where I discovered quantum computing over a decade ago. And at that moment, I knew that there was no going back. I eventually returned to research at IBM Quantum, working on quantum error correction and on the physics of gates and superconducting qubits. And I tell you all this because getting to work in quantum computing does not have to be a linear process. Like, you navigate this fascinating world of science, you move, you explore, you discover and grow and contribute in the process. And along the journey, you learn from everybody else around you and acquire skills that will help you do better, both at work and in the future. And in my case, I continued to learn about algorithms and applications, and eventually became the technical lead at IBM Quantum. And all that led to me being here with you today.
Thank you. And Talitha, how about you?
Thanks, and so great to be here. My name is Talitha Washington, and I am currently the director of the Atlanta University Center Data Science Initiative. So I think I might be the quantum newbie on the panel. So I came into quantum just recently, but I'm originally from Evansville, Indiana, which is also home of the first Black mathematician. I'll be the second one from Evansville. So I am a mathematician by training. I do applied mathematics. So what I like to do is look at systems, look at what's happening, and interpret what's happening by using mathematics so I can make predictions. And a lot of that work involves a computer, scientific computing, so we can crunch some numbers, so to speak. So that's kind of where I fell into quantum. I was a program officer at the National Science Foundation last year, and I was there for 3 years, but most recently I worked in the Convergence Accelerator program, and I was leading the quantum track. And essentially what we were doing was funding research, providing funds for people to do research that included quantum sensing, quantum simulators, interconnects, architecture, and the building of a quantum workforce. Now, the Convergence, so I'm not speaking on behalf of NSF, got to throw that in there. But for the Convergence Accelerator, what we mean by convergence is having different disciplines really to come together. I think my colleague always used to call it a smoothie, but really a blended team of these different disciplines coming together to solve problems of societal interest. And in this case, it's the issue of quantum. How do we scale up? How do we create these architectures, these interconnects? And so the research teams we funded had different types of institutions. They networked, they cross-collaborated, And the accelerated part of the convergence accelerator was we wanted their research to progress quickly, which meant that we provided them support by giving them training. So as they say, even grown-ups, we need training to support our work every now and then to make sure that we're doing it efficiently. And then when I was leaving NSF in August, I went back to my old division, the Division of Undergraduate Education, and was like, hey, we have this mandate coming down from the Hill or suggestion, however you want to interpret it, saying, we need to educate a quantum workforce, K through 12. And I'm looking at what's happening in quantum and the convergence accelerator, and we're barely getting below graduate students. And so I was like, we need to have this discussion about how do we train this next workforce to do this thing called this quantum science education. And so my old directorate, where the Division of Undergraduate Education lives, EHR, put out a Dear Colleague letter in the fall where they're funding that so we can figure out how do we train people and how do we make sure that includes all demographic groups, African Americans, Hispanics, American Indian, and so on. So I come at it from a different angle, from the funder perspective, even though I'm not speaking on behalf of that, but that's how I entered into the quantum. And then as a mathematician, I love all things quantum computing and algorithms. So it's so good to be here.
Thank you, Talitha. I'm going to actually just hand you the first question. And I think this was reflected in a number of the student questions. And I think it's important to kind of get the fundamentals down as we have this conversation. But what is quantum and what does a quantum technologist do?
Any of us? I can take a first shot if you want.
Go for it.
All right. So, I'll say that what we call quantum technologies, quantum is a word that somehow we kind of like appropriated. Have been using it, as alone to mean a lot of people just quantum computing, even though quantum is really a discrete, package of energy. That's basically what it is, right? And the way that we understand the systems that have these properties is quantum mechanics. Now, what we call quantum technologies refers to the use of the principles of quantum mechanics to manipulate information. In the case of quantum computing, that's basically what it is, manipulating information. Or there are other things that you do, push the detection limits, for example, measurement limits. That's in the case of sensing technologies. Or you use it to improve communication beyond the limits of conventional classical technologies. Now, to do that, you have to be able to control and manipulate quantum mechanical systems. And this is key because properties like entanglement and coherence that we hear about, they happen in nature. For example, they happen in some materials, but they are of no use to you unless you can figure out how to control and manipulate it. And so part of what scientists and engineers working in this field do is try to find how to design and build things to have that control and manipulation and be able to exploit it for computation, for sensing, or for communication. And they also find ways like me, in which you can benefit from the technology and understand how you can get a separation of its capabilities from classical technologies and how that separation translates into advantages that can solve science or business problems. And I would say that what is truly special about these technologies is that they're not really offering, they're not offering merely an incremental gain. Right? It's not about being able to add more transistors or multiply clock speed, because they work fundamentally different. So they represent completely new paradigms of computation, for example. It's not that they do the same things better or faster, is that they do things in a fundamentally different way that has no classical analog. And they bring with it the promise of things that could not be possibly achieved otherwise, like you said, Naomi, in the introduction. Right, like solving classically unsolvable problems, having provable secure communications, or sensors and clocks with unprecedented sensitivity and accuracy. So those are kind of like ways in which they affect they will affect our lives in the future, and are doing so now by helping achieve those discoveries and do things that so far were considered impossible.
Great.
I'm happy to add to that.
Mm-hmm.
So, I spent a lot of time, thinking about how do you talk about quantum to lay people. I mean, I feel like I spend most of my time in the lab working with other physicists. And so you kind of get caught up in your own language of things. So I decided I was going to take a shot of quantum, talking to my daughter and some friends. So one way that I thought was helpful to get the idea of quantum across to people is that quantum is fundamentally, it describes kind of the granularity of the universe, right? I mean, it's similar to looking at, let's say, an image on a computer or a TV screen, or even just a photograph, right? So if you're far away, everything looks very continuous, right? And all the, the image is very smooth, the colors are very smooth, but as you zoom in, what you start to see is that, let's say, an image is built up of individual pixels, and maybe, those don't have an infinite number of colors. They have specific properties to them, like they're green and red and blue, right? And what makes quantum difficult, I think, sometimes for people is that, we don't see that granularity, right, in our everyday lives. But if we were able to zoom in, what we'd see is that, the granularity of matter, atoms, electrons, right, or the granularity of light and energy, like photons, have very special properties that are unique to quantum particles. And people might have heard these words before, and you'll probably hear them again in this kind of this webinar. But you have something called superposition and something called entanglement. And these are properties that classical particles like coffee cups just don't exhibit. These are just things that you can't experience in the classical world. But what these two properties that I'm not going to go into, superposition and entanglement, create this ability for quantum systems to kind of communicate with each other. It's almost a little bit like they're psychic. I was trying to figure out, like, what is the word, to describe this in a classical way without, getting too mystical. But it is a little bit like energetic mutuality. And what this allows you to do is, in, let's say, something like a quantum computer, you'll have, quantum bits, which are the quantum analogies for zeros and ones. And what happens is that these quantum bits can behave communally. So they interact together in such a way that creates enormous amounts of parallelism. And that parallelism is incredibly powerful in terms of parsing information and doing complicated computations. And one of the things that I see is really exciting about quantum computers in particular is the idea that because they're fundamentally quantum computers can solve quantum computations. Quantum computations are very difficult for classical systems. And what are some quantum computations that are really important for everyday life? You can think of things like chemistry is fundamentally quantum, right? Molecules are quantum, right? And so if we want to try to make new matter, or we want to make new molecules or new chemistry, or even things like new vaccines and medicines, it's very difficult for classical computers to do simulations to see if these vaccines or these chemicals will actually work. And the power potentially in the future for quantum computers is that instead of going through very lengthy trial and error, synthesis of materials, one can actually do the computation instead to try to speed up the process for things like drug creation. So this is what I see is really exciting about quantum computing and quantum materials, but also these really wonderful properties of superposition and entanglement allow the use of quantum systems, as Zaida said before, for improved communications, much better sensitivities potentially than we can achieve with our current classical systems. That will definitely improve our world. And when we think about sensing, we think of, as people, we think about the senses of sight and smell, touch. But for quantum sensors, what we're talking about is the sensing of fields, magnetic fields, electric fields, gravitational fields that could be used for navigation, et cetera. But in terms of what a quantum engineer does, or let's say what a quantum technologist does, is I feel like I like the idea of a quantum technologist being a very broad type of person, right? I mean, I think about quantum technology very much like any other technology industry, right? In the beginning, you need people who have a lot of technical skills in terms of quantum information, right? So that they can figure out what can we do with this technology? How can we exploit it to, improve the world in some way, right? But fundamentally, when we get to the part where we're going to create products, right, and that we're going to have people interact with those products, what we need are engineers, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers. We're going to need computer scientists who can write the operating systems for these quantum computers, who can create the algorithms, right, to do the computations. We're going to eventually need product designers who are going to be able to take these things and make them be able to interface, with outside users. And ultimately, we need the public to be able to take these products eventually and turn them into, like, really bring innovation to the table, right? So if we think of something like the laser, the people who created the laser, had no idea the vast application space that it was going to encompass now, right? But it was ultimately, entrepreneurs, right, and end users who really took that technology and turned it into something beyond what we expected. So I really hope that, people that are listening to this, especially high school students, that you understand that, it's not just one path. It's not just one path to be able to contribute. There are so many ways that you can contribute. And we hope, of course, for you to be there, right, to push this future technology.
Yeah, I'll just add on just a wee bit, not too much. But, when I think of quantum, I kind of go back 100 years ago, thinking about Newton, when he had that equation everybody loves, right? Force equals mass times acceleration. But that equation, that's a classical, how things move, how's that ball moving when you throw it up, it comes back down. It ignores a lot of stuff. It's an approximation, a generalization of what really happens in the physical world. And these classical mechanics, like Newton's law, breaks down if the system travels too fast, or if there's some sort of strong gravity, or if you have really small systems like atoms. So there was something else that was needed because something wasn't right. These classical mechanics did not capture how these things were moving. Even that simple force equals mass times acceleration that we all know and love, it didn't capture it for these specific systems. So this problem occurred back in the 1800s when people, they were working out electricity, they were working out magnetism, and they ran into these ideas. You have this electron. Is it a particle or is it a wave? Light. Is it a particle or is it a wave? And how do we interpret it and describe and understand these systems, right? So if light is a particle, well, what's its mass, right? So we end up with the in trouble, well, let's say, if we only go in a classical sense. And you can also ask yourself, if in theory, in Zoom land, right, anything can happen. So what if you were actually moving faster or at the speed of light? Then what? How does classical mechanics address that? And that's the problem of relativity. So there are these two issues, moving super fast, being super small. And so something else needed to come into play to really describe that physical phenomenon, what was going on. And so that's why we have what is called quantum mechanics. And now we're figuring, now 100 years later, we're figuring out, how do we take these quantum mechanics theories, now that we have the technology to harness that power to move quantum computing in an exponential way. So it's really exciting field to see grow. And it's one of those, I guess you could almost call delayed gratification, in that, if somebody tells you learn this now, you never know when it will become useful later, because quantum mechanics has been around for a long time, right? It didn't come yesterday. It's been around for a long, long time. But it wasn't clear at the beginning what it would be useful for. So if you're in that math class or whatever class, and you say, well, when will I ever need to know this? You never know, because later it could actually revolutionize, what's happening in technology, as quantum is doing for us today.
Thank you, Tilly. I think you just energized a bunch of students to do their math homework. I want to throw out another question, and Talitha, I might start with you, which is, how do we, we're at this moment where we need new workers to come into this field to help further this vision. How do we retrain our existing workforce in quantum? And sort of what institutions and partnerships need to be involved in that effort?
Yeah, well, quantum is one of those things where it has to be more than just physicists doing it, right? It has to be a larger scale effort, because it really is, back in the day, we had the space race, Katherine Johnson got us to the moon, the Russians didn't get up there and drop bombs on us, right? But now we don't have bombs, that is our threat. It's people can use quantum computing to break codes, to break internet codes. And so we don't want that to get in the hands, that quantum power, let's say, to get in the hands of somebody else that essentially would kind of destroy our crypto system, so to speak. And so we have this quantum race to really push the envelope and figure out before somebody else does. So it's parallel. And so really, in order to do that, we need to leverage all of our talent in the nation. The National Academy of Sciences put out a Minority Serving Institutions report, and they said that, we are in the next decade, we're going to need 1 million more STEM professionals than what we have on track. And they argue that the way that we're going to actually remain competitive as a country, that we need to have a strong, robust STEM workforce. Quantum's built on the STEM workforce. And the way to do that is to have more people of color in STEM and to open up those spaces. So the idea of diversifying STEM, having the STEM demographics kind of match that of our nation as we go through this huge I'll say in air quotes, demographic shift, it really is a matter of, in quantum, national security. There are efforts to expand our workforce. My former colleague, Thomas Searles, when I was a math professor at Howard University, he's still there. He's in the Department of Physics. And as a physicist, he likes to study materials for new computers, making them safer, faster, and more secure. Who doesn't love that, right? And so Thomas established a new program and a partnership with IBM. It's called the IBM Historically Black College and University Quantum Center, to increase the quantum capacity and research and innovations at historically Black colleges and universities. And so historically Black colleges and universities are actually known for overproducing STEM, right? 30% of the STEM majors who graduate come from HBCUs, where we only make up like 3% of the higher ed institutions. And there's another effort out of Morgan State, Tim Akers. Morgan State is another historically Black college and university in Maryland. And so Tim is building a network of historically Black colleges and universities, along with minority business enterprises, national labs, industry, to really figure out how do we create a quantum literacy workforce that is diverse. Because right now, if we looked at people of color, underrepresented groups in quantum, we could pathetically count them. It's a very small number. So, at the risk of sounding too quantum leapish, in order for our country really to move forward, we need to kind of figure out how to create different pathways for folks to come into quantum and really broaden who's participating in the quantum space. So I am glad to see Tim and Thomas create these efforts, but more work needs to be done.
Thank you. Sarah, any?
Yes, I if I may add, a little bit to that and expand it, right? Like not only to retraining current workforce, but education in general. I think that we should think creatively and not rely on the traditional models of education, because a fundamentally different technology demands a fundamentally different approach to education. Starting with, like Talita said, incorporating quantum information science into curricula, and importantly, making it accessible. So we need to embrace a model of hands-on immersive learning with open access to the technology, open source software tools, and open science supporting a diverse community that is learning while working with these systems and using these tools in collaborative environments. So to give you some examples, like hackathons, IBM's hackathons have been very successful at providing those immersive education experiences where teams can form and you develop, like you enter, like come in with no knowledge, come out with a lot of skills and in the field. It's amazing what they can achieve. And what can be more hands-on than having your own teacher, for example, reserve priority access to quantum computing systems for the students to use in the classroom to solve homework problems and for in-class demonstrations. And these are things that we make available to faculty. Global summer schools have been very popular as well. one of the few positive things from this terrible pandemic is that we normally do these summer schools in person, and we have about a couple hundred students in attendance. Last year, we had to do it virtually, and instead we had thousands of students all over the world. We also have awards that recognize contributions to education in quantum information science. And so now, like, going more into the area of retraining existing workforce, not only students. I use the example of teachers, like these teach the teacher programs. And they offer the necessary support, the tools, the network, give the learning resources and the system access that they need to bring high quality education experience to their students. The IBM Quantum for Educators is an example of that. Talita mentioned NSF efforts. The NSF Q2 work program is another example where it's helping teachers and the workforce and to communicate with one another and learn and collaborate. And I want to echo something that Talita mentioned also, that traditionally learning about quantum information science has been something that you do in college, and we need to change that. And we need to start building the knowledge base while at school and developing age-appropriate education resources. And in that vein, we're working with NSF to help advance the National Q212 initiative, which is seeking this industry and academic partnerships to expand quantum education to students in middle and high school nationwide. Q2 Work is also working on that to a certain extent. Other things that we're partnering with the coding school to offer education to thousands of students around the world for an entire academic year. And then a couple of fun ideas that are being developed with our partners is education using games at IBM. And then also the University of Tokyo is creating quantum computing comics that can be used for teaching in a fun and accessible way. So ultimately, I see a future, in the future, a new generation of these quantum natives emerging. And it's in our hands to bring that future together, closer.
Tara, anything to add?
Yes, I had one thing to add to this. I mean, I feel like the between Zaira and Talita, it's been, they've offered some very concrete suggestions. One thing that, this is my personal opinion, but one thing that I think would help enormously for quantum, but for STEM as well, is to start to teach principles earlier. You don't need, even at the kindergarten or grade school level, I think about science very much like a language, right? So it'd be much easier to learn a second language starting at the age of 5 or 6 than starting at the age of 14. And one of the issues that I see is that when you start teaching physics or chemistry or hard courses when students are in 10th grade or 9th grade, right? So they're now teenagers. The people who can most easily contribute are people who have a natural facility to it, or they have parents that have exposed them to these ideas. And what I feel like that does is that it might limit participation, right? So I think the earlier the exposure you have, the more you open your mind to these ideas. And so starting early, I think, would be incredibly important. But for teachers or for people looking for resources and how to improve quantum information, how to improve quantum education, I definitely recommend, what Zaira and Talita said, is going to check out the Q212 partnership. There they provide kind of resources for quantum. The issue is that, with the internet, there's so many choices and there's so much information. The question is, what is the good information? And so the Q212 partnerships, kind of aim is to try to find out, create resources that people can use for educators and for students. And so I think that would be a great place for people to start. This partnership has only begun, in the last year or so, but the idea is to build up the resources on that page. So keep checking in and see what suggestions they have.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna pivot to put a question out there from one of our students. His name is Ethan, and he asks, what is the demand for jobs in the quantum field? And how does it compare to a field like programming? And so any of the three of you can jump in.
Yeah. I think that, so the demand is increasing, right? Today, I would say today is not as large as the demand for programming and developers in conventional computing and AI, for example, because those are more developed technologies and there's more going on there. But it will continue to increase. It will become considerable in the future. And then the danger is that if we do nothing to increase the supply, we will not be able to meet that future demand to sustain the needs of the industry. Examples of things that will be in demand, right, and are already. Quantum engineer demand will probably multiply in the next few years as these technologies continue to make the transition from research to development. Physicists, that includes like optical, quantum physics, solid state, AMO, both experimental and theoretical. And mathematicians, electrical engineering, mechanical engineers, computer engineers, and computer science, all those would see an increase in demand. We're seeing that right now. It will continue to get bigger and bigger. The number of people exploiting quantum computing for applications, like material scientists or chemists, that will increase significantly, I would say by multiple times from what it is now. And then perhaps one of the largest increases might be in software developers, right? Like people that are researching and developing software and compilers, and the people that are consuming quantum circuits to solve problems in their field of study or business. That's something that will see a dramatic increase as well.
Not just to add on to that, so if you want to do quantum and dive into some resources and just take a head, just don't tell anybody I didn't take a physics class, even though I teach it, right? So you don't have to, even if you weren't exposed to it, doesn't mean you can't learn it on your own. There are courses, either on Coursera, edX, IBM that you take. There are TEDx talks that are super fascinating about quantum. So sometimes I watch these videos while I'm washing my dishes. It's kind of random, but there are a lot of ways in which you can learn this. And, one could ask, what do I need to know? Well, a lot of the quantum, at least on the computing side, is based on linear algebra. So if we think of vectors and matrices, these are just ways that we can do calculations in multidimensional spaces. And then, we don't want to get too complex, but there's also complex numbers and variables. It lets us have two different parts, a real part and an imaginary part that we like to, I guess, have a ball with. We like to play with, there's a ball in which we can configure numbers and describe these numbers. So linear algebra, complex numbers, and really it's just kind of an open mind to think about things in a different way. So when we think about this whole future workforce, what will quantum look like? We can guess. It will open, we'll see exponential growth, but it's not clear, at least for where I sit, where exactly it will go. But it's an exciting field to get into. And just don't ask that question of when do I need to know it, because you just never know that when it will be useful. And just have a pliable mind and learn from either YouTube or these courses that you can take online. And just because it's Women's History Month, I just want to put in this one little plug for my math twin, Talithia Williams. She's another mathematician. I'm Talitha Washington, Talithia Williams. It's a thing. But the term computer bug, so when you're like programming and you run into a bug, that was actually invented by Margaret Hamilton, who literally was in her computer room and there were bugs on the computer. So there were physical bugs on the computer. So she had to get the bugs out. So next time, if life gets hard, you run into computer bugs, just, just take a pause, think about Margaret. They were actually named because she had literal bugs on her computer. So I guess there could be a worse scenario. I don't like bugs at all.
I think you are not alone in that. Sarah, anything to add?
Yeah, so I feel like, to be honest, like there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of quantum technologies. And so, as I see it, whether it's from, a programmer perspective or not, maybe one of the easiest ways to contribute and kind of gather the information necessary to participate is just by learning the basics of the language. So there are certain competencies or certain ideas that people need to understand to be able to contribute to the field. And what I see, from an engineering or computer science perspective is that what people really need, is to be able to translate, to be able to understand what the physicists are saying, right? To be able to communicate why quantum is interesting to the public. And so just having like a traditional, let's say, university degree in something like computer science or programming, but with some additional courses to understand the basics of quantum information science, I think that that would create a well-rounded person who could participate in quantum if they needed to, or if the industry exists, while at the same time being able to also contribute to other industries. So, you know, it's my hope that, you know, we're going to start to have more quantum engineering degrees, right? Where there is, you know, quantum isn't just for the physicists, but is brought to the engineers as a way to understand kind of the basics and how to contribute.
Great, thank you. We're getting close to being out of time, but a number of students asked questions about potential applications of quantum. So Jaquan asked, could it be used to combat disinformation? Shamira asked, you know, what other fields might it contribute to? And so I wonder if you could all just sort of briefly talk about one of your favorite potential applications of quantum, just to give people a picture of really the promise of what this field can produce. And so, Talitha, any potential applications that have you excited?
Sure. You know, as a mathematician, math gets me all excited. So, you know, if we can remember way back in the 1980s, which is way back for a lot of people, not me, physicists, right, had the idea of the quantum computers, but we had a theory. 25 years later, a mathematician, Peter Shor, publishes a paper about how a quantum computer could surpass that hurdle of basically decreasing the noise, or which could lead to a loss of information. And so just, you know, understanding that in 1980s, we had this idea of quantum computers, it wasn't until 25 years later, we had a mathematician come and say, here's a way that we can write quantum algorithms. So there's this delayed gratification that happens in STEM. So things aren't solved overnight. It can happen over time. And so just be patient with the work that you have, the work that you do. And, you know, this guy, Peter Shor, he was able to show how you can basically divide numbers, how you can find prime numbers, right? We learn prime numbers in school. What's the smallest prime too, right? So we learn prime numbers. Why are we learning them? Oh, because they're used to break code or make codes, right? Who knew? So, you know, but using quantum computers, we can actually break codes by factoring numbers, which sounds like it could sound like an elementary idea, no pun intended, but a lot of these things build along the way and are interconnected, so to speak. So just, you know, my thing is, you never know what could be applied to quantum. Here we have a math guy coming in and developing a quantum algorithm, which really spurred a lot of these new innovations in the technology field. So it's just going to be exciting to watch moving forward, and jump in where you can and have fun with it.
Thank you.
If I may add a little bit to that, you know, Tara mentioned at the beginning in her introduction applications of quantum computing for chemistry, right, and materials design and things like that. And that's one of the, you know, one of the original value propositions for quantum computing, right? Like you use basically a piece of nature that you understand to simulate other parts of nature that you don't understand. You know, so you know, chemistry, physics, materials development, and so on. But we also have algorithms that improve machine learning processes that help you explore spaces where you can reveal properties of data that are inaccessible otherwise. And then you use that to achieve advantages, say, in classification of data for training AI models. And that will help you, you know, basically gain an advantage in any field that uses supervised machine learning, for example. And machine learning is prevalent in many, many fields. So an easy, you know, and convenient way to think about, you know, applications for quantum computers, or what are they good for, is that they're good at solving simulations of nature involving quantum mechanics. We talked about that before. They're good at solving algebraic problems. And they're good at like doing things like search or graphs. They're good at sampling and inverting matrices, so they can help you solve, for example, differential equations or graph problems, which could include problems involving networks and things like that. And you know, in all of these cases, a property that is key is that a quantum computer can interfere different quantum mechanical states and find the best solution. And so these are just a couple of examples. We're out of time. I could like speak about this for hours. There are many more. But as we put the technology in the hands of more people, users will also continue to find new ways to discover and to unlock more and more of its full potential. So that's one of the beauties of these too.
Thank you. Tara, any one application that has you particularly excited?
What I think would be really exciting is when we can use quantum computers to model materials, right? I mean, oftentimes this is also very much a trial and error process. So people, you know, synthesize materials and then they try to see if they have the properties that are necessary for whatever application we have. So one material that, you know, is potentially very exciting for technology is high TC superconductors. So that is superconductors that can operate at higher temperatures. And people have been working on trying to develop these materials for years, and having quantum computers that could potentially tell us how to do this faster, what materials we need to put together to create these high temperature superconductors would be amazing, because what it would do is would allow us to have materials that essentially have no resistance for electricity. So that would mean more efficiency in distributing electronics and electricity, and also what it could do is help our society from going from an electrical society to more of a magnetic society. And so, you know, this is just like, I feel like it's a little bit out there and it's far away, but that's what makes quantum so exciting, is ultimately the things that we don't appreciate, that we can't see right now, right? We can't see all the potential applications. We don't see how it will change the world. And we can't necessarily even see how, by trying to study the properties and bring them into kind of our knowledge base, how that will change our way that we think about technology. I mean, I think that that's what's really exciting to me, is all the possibilities that are out there in the future.
The possibilities are endless, it seems. Just as a final question, I'd love if each of the three of you could recommend just one potential resource where people could go to find out more. It could be a book, a course, a website, just one resource that you would encourage people to check out if they want to find out more about getting in this field or the potential opportunities there are.
Just one? There are so many. All right, if I have to pick just one, I would say that there is a huge collection of education and community videos on the Qiskit YouTube channel. So start there. There's tons.
Awesome. Talitha or Tara?
I'm a big fan of the MIT lectures. So if you Google MIT lecture quantum, the videos will come up. They have videos like Introduction to Superposition, Wave Mechanics, and I will actually put this on my TV, grab popcorn and a soda and watch it, right? So sounds a little geeky, but you know, that's just how I roll, right? But yeah, I'm a fan of the MIT lectures. They walk through different concepts. You can pause and kind of think about what they said and then press play. But check out the lectures and see what you like. You know, we don't always have to be given an exam or a quiz to ensure that we're learning. We can learn in different ways. So just be open to kind of learn on your own. And a lot of schools, it's going to take a while for education to keep up with what skills are needed in quantum, because it's still not completely clear. At least, you know, how do you do it at down grade level? So just kind of be open to creating some of your own educational work and giving yourself homework and giving yourself time to just take a lecture here or there online, maybe with MIT, maybe with Coursera, edX, so you can kind of learn these different new cutting edge areas, because, you know, as you say, the opportunities are endless. So take the quantum leap.
Thank you. Tara, one resource you would recommend?
I actually have, I have two. One thing that I think that would be interesting for people, I mean, okay, so it's three. We mentioned the Q12 partnership. That's q12education.org, which is a good resource for students and educators. But also one place to look for, what's going on in quantum is quantumconsortium.org. So that's kind of a national initiative. And, for kids, I think, or let's say not even kids, for anybody, I mean, they've recently integrated like the principles of quantum mechanics into Minecraft. So that's QCraft. You can look that up on YouTube for those who are interested in video games. But my one suggestion, for educators, students is, find someone to sit down with when you look at these videos, right? The thing that's fun about physics is kind of the philosophical aspects of it and talking about it and trying to learn together. Sometimes, I mean, especially now, educators don't necessarily have the means or the curriculum to educate students, but even listening to like a YouTube video together and then and discussing it as a group, I think is a great way to start the process of thinking about science and to think about it as a community.
Great, thank you. So from MIT to video games, we have a lot of options to find out more information. Thank you so much to all of our panelists who took time out of their day to talk about this important question about the ways that we develop a more diverse and robust quantum workforce. I think we all have left here with a lot to chew on. And I would encourage everyone to continue looking into this question. And that concludes today's panel. So thank you for coming.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you.